All right, we are live. It is June 8th, 2026. I'm Joe, also known as the Stoic Viking, and today we're going to be covering RRD/RRC versus ISA. I get this question quite a lot because people are always like, so they get what they believe is an understanding of what ISA and RRC or RRD is. All right, we're going to get into that, what the difference between RRD and RRC is, and the debate over that as well. But people get a general understanding of what. All right, hold on one second. Sorry.
Take your time. If you need to adjust anything or clarify any points, I'm here to help you keep the flow smooth.
All right. Well, apparently I hit a wrong button and things were still going. So I apologize, everybody. Anyways, so a lot of people get a general understanding of what they believe ISA is, and RRD, the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment, the Ranger Reconnaissance Company, and they think they're very similar. And I will begin to tell you that the two biggest things is they have two different roles. They both work within AFO, which is your advanced force operations, which is sort of preparing the battlefield through levels of reconnaissance and intelligence for direct action missions and all sorts of different types of missions. But that's really the biggest difference is RRC/RRD specializes more on the reconnaissance side of things, and the intelligence support activity specializes more in the intelligence portion of that. So these are two different things, and there's a bit of a distinction. Howie, good morning, brother. How you doing? All right. So a lot of these organizations, they get lumped together because both are secretive. They're both understanding that they JSOC lists them as tier 1 units, and then they both support targeting. Both of them have direct action capabilities, but it is not their main job. And that's the other thing is you have to understand JSOC lists 5 tier 1 units, and each one of them has a different role. You have SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force, which everybody probably the most two widely known tier 1 units, and their jobs are counterterrorism and essentially direct action. They are essentially of the tier 1 units, each tier 1 unit has its sort of own job and its own kind of place within that organizational framework. So Delta and SEAL Team 6 are your shooters, if you will. They specialize in the counterterrorism. They're the ones, if you have to, people need to get shot in the face. Those are the two organizations you call. The other organizations, their people get trained up to a certain level. So just in case things do go down, they can definitely handle themselves. But that is not their day-to-day job that they train on. RRC, right? They are the sort of tier 1 unit of reconnaissance. A lot of people probably, if you want to think about that tactical level of reconnaissance, they also do some things that are maybe not necessarily as tactical. There could be some bleed over to what kind of similar stuff that ISA does, which is maybe your clandestine, your covert operations, but nowhere near the level or the scale that ISA does. And just like ISA also has, especially within their tactical detachments, they also have the ability to do reconnaissance as well. Just like Delta and SEAL Team 6 also have recce teams and recce troops. So they also have this, but it's at what operations does each one support? For example, the recce teams and the recce troops within SEAL Team 6 and Delta, their reconnaissance, their tactical reconnaissance, those guys do are more focused on their specific missions of their particular units. RRD or the RRC, they will then focus. They are not only do they focus on their missions, but they also do tactical reconnaissance for Joint Special Operations Unit to a broader aspect. Kind of similar how ISA, not only do they support Blue and Green, but they also do their own operations and then support JSOC on a wider whole. So, So, so a lot of people may understand, but before we get into like what exactly is, and I'm going to break this down. We're going to go through the history of the Ranger Reconnaissance Company into the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment, some arguments about whether what is the current name, what is the current acronym to be used. But we'll get into that later. So, for anybody who doesn't know, if you've been watching my channel, you probably know what ISA. So ISA is the Intelligence Support Activity, which I was a former operator for, and so people were like, who were going to jump in the comments, they're like, well, RRC collects intelligence, right? Because I'm saying that RRC does reconnaissance and ISA does this intelligence, right? Just bear with me for a second. And because they do collect intelligence, just like also ISA also does surveillance. There is an overlap, but their primary focus is different. The primary focus of RRC is reconnaissance. The primary focus of ISA is intelligence. And let's get into what the difference is between reconnaissance versus intelligence. So the one of the most important distinctions is, is surveillance is like, or reconnaissance is what is happening, right? Intelligence is why is it happening? And I know this is like a very like surface level kind of like, but just want to break it down to an easy concept as you start to understand. So reconnaissance, you're going to assess where the target is. Intelligence is going to be like, who is the target? The reconnaissance asks, what can I observe? Intelligence asks, what can I understand? Like, so there's different levels of this, and you could almost think in certain ways sometimes reconnaissance happens before intelligence in a lot of different situations, but not all situations. So it doesn't always happen like that, but in a lot of ways it does. And especially in my particular experience, you have to find the target before you can then do intelligence on it. And in order to know it's in order to basically find more deep intelligence on the target, you not only need to find the target, but you need to know its pattern of life, right? So that's where reconnaissance comes, you typically before the actual collection of intelligence, if you will. So let's say that we're hunting terrorist facilitators. So RRC may identify the house, the vehicle, the meeting locations, security patterns, and daily movements. And that's valuable. But ISA might want to, if let's just say, and let's imagine they're doing this operation together. ISA might want to know who's funding him, who he's talking to, who are his associates, uh, who is a part of his network, what communications are they using, and what organization supports them. A much deeper dive into what is going on with that specific target, not just like the physical attributes of that particular target. So that's kind of probably one of the bigger differences. And obviously, reconnaissance can help you with that one particular target, and maybe some other ones that facilitate and with that, and then you can then delve other targets because of that. But intelligence breaks that more down, and especially for physical relationships, it's easier to see, and also a better understanding of how these targets operate, and then how if you were to attack that network, that is definitely a deeper dive into the information that you need to in order to exploit these networks. So So think of it like this: RRC helps to find the target. ISA would help to explain the target, right? These are simple ways to sort of explain some of the things that they do. Remember, there is overlap, okay? And also remember that there's also a big size difference. So both Delta, SEAL Team 6, and Intelligence Support Activity, they're very large. Of the tier 1 units, they're probably the three largest. The Ranger Reconnaissance Company, the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment, is probably the smallest of the tier 1 units, right? So they are your tier 1 level Rangers, and they do a lot of their operations and and we'll get into the history. A lot of their reason why the RRC and RRD were created was because of Rangers needed more reliable reconnaissance for their operations. And they also were kind of similar to why ISA was created after the failure of Operation Eagle Claw. They saw gaps within their capabilities regarding other organizations who were supposed to fill that. So they decided to create it organically. And that's similar of why RRC/RRD was created. Omega, this is awesome information. Understanding what options are out there, understanding how one would get into one of these units. So the difference is, so the Ranger Reconnaissance Company is very similar to the Air Force Special Operations Tier 1 unit, the 24th STS, and SEAL Team 6, which is they only recruit from already existing, essentially Tier 2 operators within their particular pipeline. So typically your Tier 1 Rangers, if that's what we're going to call your RRD, are going to recruit from your already existing veteran Rangers. Your SEAL Team 6 is also only going to recruit from its existing veteran Navy SEALs. And then the 24th STS is going to do the same thing for their Air Force Special Operators in the number of different roles that they have that fall under AFSOC. ISA and Delta are unique in the fact that anybody can try out for their organizations, and they do have recruiters. So you can pretty much, most of them are open source nowadays, and you can find the recruiters. They're not going to be listed under, it's not going to be like ISA recruiter. If you Google it, you'll be able to find it. And the same thing for Delta. It's not listed as the Delta recruiter. But if you Google it, it'll probably take you down a way to actually find it. So if we were to get into, so what is some of the things that that we're going to discuss? Obviously, we're going to talk more about RRC and RRD. What's the sort of the difference? Where's the timeline? Where's the sort of breakdown of, there's different contradictory reporting on what became first between RRC and RRD. Okay. We talk about ISA. We're going to talk about AFO, or Advanced Force Operations. We're obviously going to talk about some of the two biggest intelligence, which is the HUMINT, the SIGINT, and we've already talked about reconnaissance versus intelligence, but we'll dive into that a little bit more. And then also we're going to cover how RRC's elements sound very similar to the recce capabilities, the recce teams, the recce troops that both Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 have, and where is the overlap and what's the difference between them. And then obviously we can talk about the Tier 1 debate and how modern targeting actually works. And obviously it's ever evolving, it's ever changing. This never stops. So, but it's very important. We are not going to be talking about classified information. I'm not going to be giving out TTPs or any sort of sensitive information. I'm particularly doing research on this, even though I know a lot of this stuff. I'm doing research through open source. That way I kind of keep the information within open source, but because I have a really good understanding of what actually is going on, I feel like I can compile it a little bit better than most people can. And I know that like certain stuff is going to be rumors, and I can sift through that a little bit better than some people who have claimed to know about this subject, if that makes sense. Omega says, my son will be 20 this year. Would you allow your son to join this service in this current military? So I'm assuming you're asking me if I had a son, would I allow him to join the service within the current military? Absolutely. I think that the military is an amazing experience. What my advice to anybody who's joining the military is figure out what job you want to do, whether it's, you want to be a pilot, you want to fly jets, you want to fly helicopters, or you want to be a Tier 1 operator, or maybe you just want to be a Tier 2, maybe you just want to go get your Green Beret. Whatever it is, go get it. Go get that job, then do that job for about 5 years and then leave. There is no point to spending 20 some years in the military when there are amazing skills and amazing experience that you can get. But once you get it and you are in that job for like anywhere from 3 to 5 years, there is no benefit for you to stay. And the amount of money that you get for retirement that requires you to spend the next 10 years there is not worth the amount of money that you can get on the civilian side of things for the experience um, and the skills that you achieved while in the military. So that would be my advice to anybody, and including if I had a son, that's exactly what my advice would be. So now we're going to cover the history of the RRC, the RRD. So it's the Ranger Reconnaissance Company or the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment. So let's go back to 1980. And everybody's heard of Operation Eagle Claw. For those who weren't, this was a failed attempt to rescue the hostages in Iran. It was one of the worst military disasters. It was what this disaster birthed, changed the whole landscape for modern special operations. It added, because at that time, remember, the only units that existed, the only special operations, the units that existed was the Rangers, the Green Berets, and essentially your normal Navy SEALs, right? So SEAL Team 6 didn't exist, ISA didn't exist, RRD didn't exist, 24th STS didn't exist, not to my knowledge. And also the 160th SOAR, which is the Army's Special Operations Aviation Unit. And then JSOC and SOCOM didn't exist. So there was no coordination. So all these things was the catalyst for our modern special operations and really shaped even how our overall general military does, because we rely heavily on SOCOM and JSOC nowadays. So, but as the Ranger Regiment matured throughout the 1980s, the leadership identified significantly the capabilities gap, and the Rangers were a direct action force, right? And they have been skilled, they have the history, like they've always done really well. They're sort of one of the premier direct action forces in the world. They're like advanced light infantry. They've always been very good. They conduct raids, they seize airfields, they capture objectives, and they do assaults. So, but there was always a problem because they definitely had a hole in their capability, was finding targets. And not only finding the targets, but confirming the target, watching the targets. And then this was sort of when they noticed this, they were like, okay, well, we need this capability. And like what a lot of modern special operations organizations do, they create that capability organically. So the Ranger Regiment decided to create sort of the Ranger Reconnaissance Company, RRC. And the purpose was simple: to provide the Ranger Regiment with an organic reconnaissance and surveillance unit. And they recruited from their most senior, their best Rangers. And then it sort of then became its like tier 1 unit, even though it wasn't a tier 1 unit at the time, but that was like their next level, right? You have the Rangers and then you got the RRCs. Like they had to essentially try out again. They had to be selected. This process started in the 80s, and then it sort of matured into the 90s. Because throughout the 90s, the units continued to evolve. Special operations was changing. We had a number of different operations, Mogadishu. There was a number of different operations throughout the world, Pablo Escobar, and slowly the military started to lean more and more heavily on special operations. And we had some successes, but we also had some failures. And one of the biggest things is counterterrorism, right? Because the rise of terrorism started to rise, that counterterrorism, because of it, became that much more important. So during this period, the reconnaissance element became highly skilled in surveillance, special reconnaissance, long-term observation, target acquisition, and even battlefield preparation. Mission wasn't, and I can tell you this from personal experience. Reconnaissance or intelligence, this is not the sexiest of jobs, right? You're enablers. You're helping the big direct action units, and they obviously get the cool Hollywood sexy jobs that they get to shoot people, right? But a lot of these jobs, remember, do not happen either without the reconnaissance. They don't happen without the intelligence. So these guys are doing the jobs that are not exactly as glamorous. and they take more time to do this, right? It's easy to get on a, helicopter, a plane, rope in, drop in, whatever it is, go shoot some people and then go home, right? What about the people who were there for months? Maybe there were operations for years prior, prepping the battlefield. Do you think that there were not people in Venezuela for months or years prior to the operation going down to capture Maduro? I give you a hint, but I don't feel like you need it. So, and so that's a big point of this, and that's kind of where similar both RRD and ISA are similar, because they are both organizations that help to prep the battlefield. That AFO, those advanced force operations, right? But they do two different portions of it. One specializes in one versus the other. Both have smaller elements that kind of overlap the other one's capabilities, their main focus capabilities. But that's probably the biggest distinction, is that RD is the tier 1 reconnaissance unit and ISA is the tier 1 intelligence unit. So that's probably easiest way to distinguish the two of them. And also ISA is much bigger than RRD. Have you met Adam Gamal? I actually personally have not met Adam Gamal. But we have communicated, but not in person. He reached out to me after my podcast on the Team House podcast with Jack Murphy, and to let me know that he really liked my podcast and essentially what I'm doing essentially on social media. He was giving me his seal of approval, which I appreciated. How many people are in RRC compared to ISA? I'm not going to give anybody exact numbers, but I will tell you that ISA is similar in size to Delta and SEAL Team 6. RD is a lot smaller than the other tier 1 organizations. It's probably easily the smallest of the 5. So we'll just leave it at that. So, but the question is, and this is a question for all of you, what do you think is harder, kicking the door or finding the correct door among a city of thousands? Because most people focus on the assault, but very few people focus on what we had to do in order to get to that success, right? Like how many man hours had to, in months, years of preparation, had to prepare the Venezuela operation to take out Maduro to have such great success, right? That would not have happened if there were not thousands and thousands of man hours in that particular country, and then around in surrounding countries, in the waters and areas like that. And so that's a big part of it, and almost kind of like your unsung heroes. But you also, obviously, the operation doesn't happen without the people who are prepping the battlefield, but it also doesn't happen without the shooters themselves. And they have to train and every single day on their capability, and RRD and ISA have to train every single day on their capability. So, but then 9/11 happened. And this is sort of where everything just gets changed. Everything gets sped up. Special operations ends up leading, the fight against terrorism, because now we have an entire global war on terrorism. And who are the best people to fight terrorism? Special operations. And we start leaning heavily into these organizations. And that's where the tier 1 organizations really start to ramp up in their funding, their training, and then also their recruitment in a way to build these even bigger. And not just the tier 1, but also the tier 2 elements. Because for anybody who doesn't already know, the Green Berets were so effective in Afghanistan and Iraq, especially in Afghanistan, that they tried to mass produce Green Berets to the point where they even tried bringing down selection for 2 weeks. They turned every special forces group from having 3 battalions to having 4. And, the 18 X-ray program was heavily pushed so they could get as many Green Berets as possible. But one of the tenets of special operations, if anybody doesn't know, is you cannot mass produce special operations. It never works well. So Absolutely. It's definitely finding the correct door. And not only does that is it not um it's harder, but it takes much longer. And it takes so many hours. And then obviously, if you find the right door, how long is it the right door for that period of time, right? Let's just say you find the right door maybe 3 months before a supposed operation is going to go down. Is it going to stay the right door for the next 3 months? So, no, you have to constantly be updating that information. You have to be updating that information. But here's the rub, you have to do it in a way that they don't know that you're watching that door or you're doing intelligence. Because once you do, people are going to know, they're going to know something's up. And then, bam, everybody flies the nest. And now you've lost thousands of hours of man hours on an operation and your target's gone. So you have to do this all delicately, right? You can't just sit somewhere with a scope and just watch this particular door because one barely do you ever get that type of access or that type of angle, but nothing's never that easy. Like most of these terrorists and criminals and cartels, whatever they are, they're not stupid, right? So they know, and especially in the modern day, they know that we're out there. We know that they're hunting them. So they are going to take their own steps to try to thwart our efforts. And the more successful we are and the more operations we do like Maduro, the enemy's now going to catch on and be like, hey, they can do this. So now they're going to be even more cautious. So these are all things that you have to take into account when it comes to advanced force operations or prepping the battlefield, whether it's reconnaissance or intelligence. Yeah, Saddam and Bin Laden, both pattern of life. These are both great examples of that, right? So, how long did we suspect that it was Obama or Bin Laden, and how long did it take for that trigger to actually be pulled? And I know that there was a couple different times where we thought we knew where Osama was, and some dry holes, some went down the took some intelligence down the wrong hole, but that's also another part of it. So so the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq fundamentally transferred special operations. Before 9/11, operations were focused more on specific operations, but now 9/11 turned this entire thing into a global manhunt, right? You were no longer confined to a certain operations. And now these tier so even in your special operations units, right, at the tier 2 level, most of them are regionally focused, and that's where we really started to lean more heavily on the tier 1 units because the tier 1 units are these tier 1 special missions unit, but they're national level. They don't have a specific boundaries to their area of responsibility. So most of them cover the entire globe. So we started to lean heavily on these guys, and especially I need to stop saying especially. I know everybody gets on me about that, but I got speech problems. Leave me alone. So especially with the successes that we had, like the Delta ISA, they just started popping off and just doing awesome stuff. We gave them the reins, we gave them the funding, and they just started crushing it, right? So so with this and with this freedom, not because of these two wars and the war on the global war on terrorism, these tier 1 units slowly as they especially as they become more successful, they were given more leeway. They were given more funding. And these organizations got more bold, more capable. They started growing their more organic capabilities within these specific units. And that's why Delta, SEAL Team 6 have their own intelligence squadrons. Are you know, ISA has its own tactical stuff, everything like that. RRC or RRD, has its own covert clandestine small organization probably within it, but it's very, very small. All these things to help constantly increase the capabilities of each one of these units. So, do you think Rangers are doing anything right now or RRC? Um, if you're talking about, that's a good question. They're probably doing something, but think of it like this: RRC For now on, I'm just going to refer to it as RRD, as the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment, just so I'm not constantly saying RRC or slash RRD. They are one of their first missions is to be the elite reconnaissance element for the Ranger units, right? Then they also have a job is to support um, greater JSOC missions. So it is possible that they are doing a reconnaissance missions out there somewhere, things like that. It's definitely possible. And but in the time of like conflicts like this, right, where there's no major ground war going on, Operation Epic Fury is obviously it's mainly a air campaign. The people that are probably doing stuff outside of the air campaign are right now are your intelligence guys. So if I had to bet who is probably doing the most out of the tier one organizations right now are your tier one intelligence guys. And that's probably going to be a combination of your CIA, your ISA, and probably your maybe even your Delta and SEAL Team 6 intelligence guys that might, either has sources, can do source operations, and there also might be some level of tactical special reconnaissance within there. And so that could be the Delta or SEAL Teams of Recce teams, or RRD might be involved in that. It's really hard to say, but I guarantee you the difference is the tier one units do operate outside of major conflicts or major wars. And this is definitely a situation where they would probably be the only ones operating. But I guarantee you the most of what's going on right now, obviously they're prepping to do targets, whether it's SEAL Team 6 or Delta. But I guarantee you the intelligence guys are on the ground running sources, trying to do what they can from inside the country of Iran. But this is just an example. So, all right. So as things as things started to develop as far as 9/11, we new commanders needed persistent intelligence, continuous intelligence correction, pattern of life analysis, target development, network analysis, and AFO, advanced force operations. Um, because if you can't find the target, you can hit the target. So the operational demand for reconnaissance and intelligence exploded, right? Until ISA started, basically pioneering a lot of the newest techniques, especially on the SIGINT side. And then RD basically was trying to pioneer some of the newest reconnaissance capabilities in order to adapt to this modern world that we now found ourselves in, which was the global war on terrorism. So, because the world became one giant manhunt and reconnaissance slowly became just as important as direct action. All right, so let's answer some questions. We're going on this next section. How come tier one's always some redhead or Asperger nerd? Are people on the spectrum more loyal? Hot Bucks Trucking. Let me try to, if I can understand your question. How come tier one's always some redhead Asperger nerd? Are people on the spectrum more loyal? Well, if you want to come back with a better question, I might actually answer it. RD, RRC sounds like Force Recon, just with better funding. You're not wrong. It is definitely so the difference. So the biggest difference that tier one units have, right, is funding. That is the biggest difference. They get a lot more money to do, and that's why they're able to, one, not only select from the tier two levels to have the best people, they also have funding, and they almost like, unless there's some issue, they can pretty much get whatever they want, right? So they have not unlimited capabilities to do to get whatever they want, whatever it's training or equipment, but there's there's very little that they don't get. So as operation expanded through Iraq and Afghanistan, the reconnaissance element became increasingly integrated with JSOC. So this is where the RRC and RRD became more and more valuable to JSOC, and then that's kind of when In 2005, I believe is when officially RRD became a tier 1 unit as part of JSOC and upped their funding capability. So, but let's real quick, let's just address the whole RRC versus RRD debate. So, in the research for this video, I have seen information that says RRC. It was originally called RRC and then eventually became RRD, which is the Ranger Reconnaissance Company, and then eventually became the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment. I've also found contradictory information that says it started as RRD and then became RRC. So, because I'm not really going to get into the weeds of that, I am just from here on out, I'm just going to refer to it probably mostly as RRD. But if I say RRC, it's okay. The world will survive. All right. And if you think one or the other, great, awesome. Throw it in the comments. But for the point of this conversation, it does not matter. All right. So we'll just leave it at that. So going into the GWANT reputations and probably going into a bit of our modern roles. All right. So what does RRC actually do? How does it evolve? And getting back into where a lot of the confusion between RRD and ISA is that most people hear words like reconnaissance, surveillance, CTA, target acquisition, AFO, and assume they all mean the same thing. They don't. Each serves a different purpose. The easiest way to understand these concepts is probably through a bit of a real world targeting scenario. Let's imagine intelligence believes a high value terrorist leader is opposing somewhere inside a major city. The assault force wants to conduct a raid. The problem is they don't know exactly where he is. They don't know his schedule. They don't know his security. They don't know his network. And someone has to figure out, and that's where the reconnaissance begins. So when you look at the Ranger Reconnaissance, the RRD's mission statement, sort of, one of the first ones that comes up is special reconnaissance. So special reconnaissance is probably the purest form of reconnaissance. And the purpose is simple: to go somewhere difficult, dangerous, and you collect information. Your team is not there to attack. They're there to learn. They're there to observe. Like, for example, let's say intelligence believes the terrorist leader is hiding some remote valley in Afghanistan. RRC infiltrates several kilometers away. For days, they observe the compound, the personnel, the vehicles, the equipment, the security positions, the movement patterns. And obviously the job is to nobody to know they're there, right? Because same thing with reconnaissance intelligence. If you get compromised, you screw up everything, because once they know that they're being watched, they're going to scrap, they're going to move, and everything you've been doing up to that point, yeah, you just fucked it up. And all your work is fucking screwed over. And you probably have to start from all over from scratch. Because the mission is not to fight. You're not there to kill anybody. You're there to understand, right? Because you either are trying to build out a target package, or maybe you're even trying to expand your further knowledge of trying to break out an entire network, because maybe you just hit this one target, or if you watch, you can maybe glean enough information that you can then create 5 targets off of this reconnaissance. So that's something to be taken into consideration. So the next is surveillance, right? That's like we say, we've already identified the target. The question changes now. What are we looking for? And now we need to understand how they live. How do we build a pattern of life? The surveillance is now we're sitting there, we're watching, and now we're observing them. So say the target lives in a compound. Now the commander wants answers. Does he sleep every night? Who visits him? When does he leave? What vehicle does he use, and what kind of security exists? So you can get this all from surveillance, and there's different types of surveillance. There's static surveillance, there's mobile surveillance. You need to understand your target, and that then if it's a mobile surveillance, then that changes things, right? And how do you do it without being compromised? That's always the part. You can do this action, you can do whatever, it's special reconnaissance, you can do surveillance, but you have to do it by completing your job without being compromised. And that, who people have not done it, that's the hardest part, because it's easy to surveil things. If I want to surveil you, I'll just stand right 3 feet behind you. But nobody's going to do operations when there's some random dude standing 3 feet behind you. That's the art of and not being compromised. And that's how you actually do this stuff. All right. So surveillance isn't watching someone for an hour. It's like watching them long enough to predict their behavior and maybe even prevent them from doing their own operations. It depends on what your exact job within this whole surveillance pipeline is, if you will. I don't even know if that's the right word to use for what the context I'm going for. So, because you have to remember, humans are creatures of habit, right? So observing people is a great way to build out a target package. Like if you want to hit somebody, right, you need to know their pattern of life. And one of the best ways to get this is through constant surveillance. So, and then the next part is target acquisition. This is probably one of the most important parts of the actual entire process. So imagine that you are looking at there are 6 compounds. Like you have a target who may be in these 6 compounds, and they all look identical, right? Intelligence believes it is one of them, but they don't know which one it is. So by using because we don't want to guess. You don't want the assault force to guess, because once they hit, if it's not the right one, once again, you've compromised. Your target's going to be gone, and you have to start all over from zero. So the assault force and the commanders and whatever political leadership who's overseeing this, they're going to want certainty. So somebody has to determine which compound, which room, which entrance, how many people are there. All these things have to be getting in. And how do you do this? And that's through your reconnaissance and your intelligence. And this is target acquisition. Because the difference between success and failure may be knowing which 6 identical buildings contain that target, to reference that example again. So, because if you hit the wrong compound, the mission fails. And then you have to start all over again. And then also, if they didn't know that you were going after them, or you were at that level to basically take that level of direct action, they do know now. And whatever security they had, they're going to increase it, which now makes your job harder. Not only do you have to restart the process of, observation, special reconnaissance, surveillance, target acquisition, you now have to deal with their increased security posture. All right. Let's answer some questions. RRC versus RSD. It's kind of like SAD versus SAC. Yeah. When I worked, I'm gonna be honest, when I worked with them in the early 2000s, we were calling them RRC. So I've seen it, like I said, I've seen information that says they started using the name RRD in the late 2000s, and that's when it became official. But I don't know. The detachment versus company, these are actually exist with the 2 different organizational structures anyway, so it all kind of changes. So does ISA detachment, what is its role? Do you all serve as rapid reaction force for your human SIGINT operatives, similar to GRS or CIA operative? Do you all perform hits? No. So no, tactical detachment of ISA does more of supporting blue and green. The difference, so that was probably one big difference between the case officers in ISA versus the case officers in the CIA. You don't get security as an ISA case officer. That's why you are tactically trained to a higher level than your CIA case officers, because you're usually on your own and you don't get GRS to take you to meetings, right? You have to do all of this on your own, and you have to defend yourself. So, and because of that, in a lot of ways, your job can actually be even harder. So, but typically ISA's tactical detachment is more focused on supporting Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, and they do work very close hold with their specific operations. But outside of that tactical detachment, most of ISA does more strategic level intelligence, kind of similar to the CIA, and they're in places before. So think of it like this: most ISA guys are already on the battlefield, preparing the battlefield. The tactical detachments are in the stack, in the jump, whatever infiltration method there, and they're there to do whatever levels of intelligence operations, however they can support the actual assaults, if you will. But yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, GRS and let's call them ground branch are two very different things, right? GRS is not your paramilitary wing. It's essentially it's your escort service, your Uber drivers for your case officers, right? It's a global response. I forget what the S stands for. I know it. I just always seem to forget it. No, not a big deal. So, but what also do they, obviously, of course, they are your tier one rangers. So what do they also do? They support ranger operations. So because most people only think about the raid, but what they don't see is everything that happens before that raid, right? Ranger Battalion is about to conduct an operation before helicopters ever launch. The reconnaissance teams are already scouting the landing zones. They're counting enemy positions. They're monitoring security positions. They're identifying obstacles, and they're verifying target occupancy, right? So that's how this organization started. They started in order to be that reconnaissance element, that dedicated elite reconnaissance element for the Rangers, because they lacked that capability. And then obviously as 9/11 happened, JSOC saw them as more of a, hey, could we also bring this capability if we need it for the other JSOC units in the mission? So that's basically how RRD went from just being the elite, reconnaissance rangers to having more of a special missions unit, JSOC assisting role, if that makes sense. So, and then which brings us to the supporting to the JSOC operations. So instead of supporting a Ranger Battalion, imagine we're now supporting a national mission. High value target is operating in a large city. The assault force hasn't been launched yet. Before that happens, reconnaissance teams may identify the safe houses, track vehicles, monitor meetings, identify bodyguards, confirm locations, and just overall build target packages. This process may take days, weeks, months. Right. And so this is some of the stuff that you're going to be like, well, isn't that what ISA does? Yes, that is a lot of things that ISA does. But in particular environments, ISA specializes in that clandestine and that covert operations, right? And a lot of people think that may not know exactly what the distinction between clandestine and covert operations, right? So a clandestine operation is so one, can a mission be both clandestine and covert, right? Because a lot of people kind of use them interchangeably in this particular they use clandestine. A lot of people use clandestine and covert interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same thing. And an operation can be clandestine, or it could be covert, or it can actually be both, right? So the easiest way to understand like what the difference is clandestine focuses on concealing the mission itself, right? The goal is for no one, especially the target, to know the operation even happened. Covert is focusing on this concealing the sponsor's identity. Like the mission's outcome might not be obvious or public, but the government or group behind it remains hidden to maintain plausible deniability, right? So clandestine, you could still be in like fatigues, but you're sneaking around, you're at night, you don't want anybody to see you. But covert is like that's when you're probably an alias. You're not a US soldier. Maybe you're not even American. I don't know. Like there are many different ways that you can have covers, things like that. So notice the distinction for the two of them, right? So clandestine is hiding the mission, covert is hiding who the mission is coming from. Like who are you actually working for? So that's the two biggest differences, right? So, and that's sort of where RRD, right? And mind you, there are possibilities where they are going to do some of the stuff that ISA does, just like ISA does some of the things that RRC does. I'm mainly, when I say I'm more talking about the focus, the main primary focus of both of these units, right? Your RRC is focusing on that tactical reconnaissance. ISA is focusing more on that covert intelligence, like what you would think that someone like in the CIA would do. That's probably the biggest difference between the primary focuses. That an ISA is a much bigger organization, and they kind of have to be for the job that they do, because non-tactical intelligence is actually, you need to have people in all sorts of places. One, you can operate in many other, you can operate in cities. So you, in order to cover all the different areas that we may think we may need to operate in one day, we need to have a large organization. So that's one of the many reasons why ISA is a much larger organization. Um, so does ISA work along NSA CIA, if you're allowed to say? Yes, they do. We actually have a very close relationship with both the CIA and the NSA, even though the unit was created because of a bad relationship that the military had with the CIA. But we became quick and close friends with CIA, and I'll just say that we actually partnered up with them and worked with them to run operations for decades, right? Especially in the mid to the mid, especially by the mid 2000s, we were doing all sorts of operations. We were like partners with the CIA, and we are probably the NSA's, like, think of us as like, we are almost like, if the NSA wants anything tactically done, especially on the SIGINT side of things, ISA is their go-to every single time. There's probably no military organization who has a closer relationship with the NSA than we do, right? And we also probably have one of the closest relationships to the CIA. But so, and then the last one I want to discuss is close target reconnaissance. So close target reconnaissance is exactly what it sounds like. It's getting close enough to the target to gather detailed information. And this can be done in a number of different ways, right? Can you do this tactically from a like behind a sniper rifle or some binoculars? Yes. Can you do this either clandestinely, or you can do this covert while you're undercover, an alias? Yes. So it all depends on the mission set and how exactly it's done. If it's usually on the side of tactical reconnaissance, RRD might get the job. But if it usually involves someone to be like very close access, like we're going to be an alias, usually ISA is going to have the job, right? And then, so that's probably usually where we're probably going to find the big distinction. And also remember, RD is only so big. Um, what So, Phantom, did you ever work with Joint Special Operations Cyber Operations Group? What is it? Yeah, JSOC's Cyber Operations Group. So, my specialty within the unit, they actually have people who specialize on the cyber things side of things. I was not one of those people. I have a certain level of cyber ability and knowledge of that particular intelligence, that subset of SIGINT, which is that, you're how to do certain things within that realm. But my specialty is more on the tactical side of things. And so probably the capabilities of the unit that I was probably least the least specialized in was probably the cyber side of things. But you do, especially all SIGINT operators within the unit, have a level of capability within that particular um, capability, or that form factor of how to collect intelligence through cyber stuff. So just say I had a level that I could do it, but I was not an expert. We'll leave it at that. Um, Justin 32, I have a question. What is the protocol if you run into somebody that you've known a while you're working operationally? Say you run into someone you served with the military and they recognize you. There is not really that great of a protocol. One, luckily, it does not really happen that much because most of the places we're at, um, you not going to run into any people like that. Probably not. So that's one good thing. I've never run into anybody in that type of status that I ran into somebody who I knew in real life. But I know it has happened prior. But usually, if you do know that person, like, you can go and stop the conversation, kind of give them a bit of a look, or you end the conversation as quickly as possible and get out, because you can sort of relay some, like, if your buddy knows that what you may be doing, you can sort of, like, especially if they're have some sort of adjacent understanding of the community, you can kind of be like, hey, it's nice to meet you. It's I've know you know I've heard so much about you. I'm glad I finally get to meet you for the first time, right? If you say something like that to somebody you've known, they're gonna kind of get the picture, right? Like, there's ways that you can convey that to somebody, that, like, hey, I'm not who you think I am. And then, be like, oh, I look like someone. I get that all the time. People think I look like a Joe or something like that, right? There are ways that you can go around it. There isn't the greatest protocol, but you're also trained to think on your feet when it comes to the type of stuff, and how to, better part, lie about these type of things. So I hope that answered your question. All right. So so now we've covered close target reconnaissance, right? Which I feel like, if of this particular the capabilities, this is definitely where ISA sort of takes us over, just because of the statuses that we operate in. We're better at this than RRD, but they definitely do this, right? Um, Remember that, but we're talking about the main focus. So now we're going to get into, make sure that I lost my spot. Okay. So what exactly is ISA, and how is it different from RRC, which we sort of already covered a bit? That ISA is your more focuses on, obviously, they have their own organic tactical reconnaissance that does a tactical intelligence, or tactical units that do similar things to what RRC does, that also Delta and SEAL Team 6 have, which are their recce teams, right? So obviously each one of these has a bit of a more of a primary focus, but they, as you can see in all these tier 1 units, they grow at least some small portion of organic capability that is redundant, that overlaps some of the other tier 1 units, right? The biggest intelligence organization is ISA. Does Delta and SEAL Team 6 have their own intelligence squadrons? Uh, they do, or they did, right? There's conversations about some of that, but I'm not going to get into that. Does RRC have its own intelligence, like maybe a small capability that's similar to ISA? Probably, right? So just keep that in mind, that there's a lot of overlap, at least small sections within each one of them. But the primary focus is that ISA is the tier 1 intelligence organization. RRC is the tier 1 reconnaissance organization. So, and then we've already kind of covered reconnaissance versus intelligence. Um, so, and then we're going to go back to sort of AFO. We're talking about advanced force operations. That's preparing the battlefield. So you have to understand that AFO is sort of like it's not an intelligence discipline. It's more of a framework, right? So while RC kind of focuses more on that surveillance, that observation, ISA focuses more on the intelligence disciplines, which is your HUMIT, your SIGINT, your technical collection, your pattern of life analysis, from whether that's gathering through that HUMIT or that SIGINT side of things, and also developing the network for both the HUMIT and SIGINT, or the other types of technical collection, in order to create some level either intelligence exploitation, or to prepare that target for a pattern of life. So if we ever want to hit that target one day, that you already know exactly where he is. Like, let's take Qasem Soleimani, right? Remember that he was hit by a missile in 2020. Let's just say that we were tracking his airplane. We knew he landed. And then as soon as he got in a car to drive away from the airport in Baghdad, he was hit by a missile, right? That was created because there were intelligence organizations who probably were tracking his aircraft. We'll leave it at that. Who knows? So our RRC, can RRC and ISA, can they support the same mission? Yes, they can. Are they typically going to do it? No. Typically, if ISA is there, RRC is typically not going to be needed because ISA can bind either they're already there doing their close access intelligence and reconnaissance, things like that. Because if they're operating in the things that they usually do, which is, city form factor, civilian clothes, RRC is typically going to stick to more of the tactical reconnaissance. And especially if you are the tactical detachment of ISA and you're working with Delta and SEAL Team 6, they have their own tactical reconnaissance elements, which are the recce teams and recce troops. So I have trained and worked with RRC a number of different times. But operationally, we do not work together that often just because our capabilities are kind of redundant. And plus, we specialize in a certain aspect of it, and they specialize more in the tactical reconnaissance, special reconnaissance type of stuff, if you will. All right. So let me just make sure. All right. So then I get the question is like, okay, well, just like people are asking me about our ISA intelligence capability versus RRC or not. I'm sorry. Let me back up. So, and this actually goes along with the question we just had. Said Jocelyn32 says in another podcast you were on, you talked about the professionalism from Delta and SEAL Team 6. Could you elaborate? Well, I'm going to go into this. So people give me the question all the time, is the ISA as being the premier tier 1 intelligence organization and then Delta and SEAL Team 6 having their own intelligence squadrons, how do they compare, right? And this is similar concept to when people ask, well, if RRC does tactical reconnaissance, what is the difference between them and Delta and SEAL Team 6's recce guys? They're reconnaissance dudes. And it's very similar in kind of like the comparison, right? So RRC does do Ranger missions, like they do reconnaissance for the Ranger Regiment, but they also do JSOC reconnaissance. How heavily they're used, I'm going to be 100%. I'm not 100% sure. I know they do get used, but if there's a reconnaissance mission for an operation that Delta is doing, right? Because Delta's reconnaissance are usually to support their operations, right? Which are usually short term, which is they know a target, we're going to go hit it, and Delta reconnaissance go out there. RRC might already be out there, especially in a tactical environment, already doing the preparing the battlefield, the AFO. In the very similar way that when we talk about ISA versus the intelligence squadrons in blue and green, is that their focus for both blue and green, their intelligence, are for their operations, right? But then ISA focuses more on the bigger picture, right? So RRC, outside of the supporting the Ranger Regiment, they are going to focus more on the bigger picture of tactical reconnaissance for the JSOC community, and ISA is going to focus on more of the bigger picture as far as the intelligence side of things. But both blue and green both have essentially their organic capabilities that have some level of what ISA does and RRC does, but it's smaller and it focuses on specifically just their missions, if that makes sense. That's typically how it's done. That's not always how it's done. So caveat again, but that's how the main focus is done. That's primarily, but one of the reasons why these tier 1s are so good is they're so flexible to adapt. They can operate, they can combine strengths, redundant capabilities with these other tier 1 units, and they just make stuff happen, right? However we can make it done, that's all that matters. It's not us versus them, if that makes sense. Going back to Jossa32's question. So I've talked about this before. this is my comment about Delta versus SEAL Team 6 and ISA is about professionalism. It's about when you are an organization, and I use a direct opposite comparison, or sort of like the left and right limits of this rate, this rating, if you will, is professionalism to toxicity, right? Because in the military, I feel like you're either a very professional organization or you're a very toxic organization because it lacks professionalism. In my experience, because I was in the tactical detachment of ISA, I got to be inside both ISA, SEAL Team 6, and Delta for quite a lot. And I got to see the inside all three organizations. By far, the most professionalism out of all the ones I ever worked with was Delta, because they have a different um, environment there. Like, and one of the biggest, easiest examples is how they treat their support. So support people in Delta are revered. Like they're like, they believe their operators believe their support people, they can't do their missions if they didn't have their support people. So they look at them like, hey, we can't do our mission without you. SEAL Team 6 doesn't look at their support guys like that. They kind of look at them as like, yeah, we need their capabilities, but you guys got to get in the way, right? And so that's kind of like an example of the general um, attitude, if you will. And ISA has this low and level of toxicity because I believe that intelligence organizations, especially like this happens in the CIA as well. There's just an inherent level of toxicity within this type of organization. It's really, if you have not experienced it, it's really hard to understand. But there's a lot of backstabbing that goes on in intelligence organizations, and so I would say the most professional organization is probably Delta, just because they're run so well. And then the next two most professional is 24th STS and RRC, because honestly, Rangers they're just so disciplined. Like whether you're tier 2 Rangers or you're tier 1, they're just a level of professionalism. There's a reason why Rangers feed really well into Delta Force. And then anyone who's ever dealt with Air Force Special Operations, whenever something goes bad, those are your best friends in the world. And those guys are competent as fuck. So the bottom two, the most toxic, is SEAL Team 6 and ISA. All right. So let's see. Before we top this out, does anybody else have any other questions? Everybody feel like I sufficiently have sort of explained the difference between RRC/RRD with ISA, and then also Delta and SEAL Team 6 recce elements? Hey, A702, baby. Welcome to live. All right. We'll go down to these questions. If you guys have any other questions, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. If there's no more, we're going to call it there. Horses are having their pedicures today, so we got to be out there. Or the farriers coming. So we have the District Cup this weekend, which is I get to play a polo match on the mall. It's our biggest match of the year, so I got to get the horses ready. Got to get those shoes on. Got to get those feet ready. Got to make them look good. All right, because if you don't look good, what's the point of doing it? You know what I'm saying? So, exit strategies one. What are the cultural differences, like personalities? Does it differ from team, etc., for both, and does it align more with NMF units? Remind me what NMF units. So I'll give you this. Like, so in Delta, each squadron, they all have their own personalities. Like generally, there's a certain like B and A squadron. The guys that go to B squadron have a different personality type than the guys in A. And then there's C squadron. And so every squadron has its sort of, especially every Saber squadron, your assault squadrons have their own personality. And when they get guys from OTC, there's kind of like a draft, and they kind of pick people based on their personalities. And this exists also in ISA. There's definitely a different personality based on the different squadrons. But overall, if you're talking about the different units, there is definitely a different personality, because I think very similar personalities, both SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force, but I think Delta Force puts more of an emphasis on certain things, like, for example, being more appreciative of their support guys, things like that. There, I could sit out here and talk about it quite a bit, but I just know that whenever I was ever at SEAL Team 6, all the support guys lived in fear of their assaulters, or their frogmen, if you will. Uh, Yes, Frank put out a thing. Jelta has G Squadron, Devru has Black Squadron. These are not to be confused with the recce teams within the assault squadrons. Yes. So SEAL Team 6 and Delta actually do it slightly differently. Their recce Delta has a recce troop within each squadron. And SEAL Team 6, they don't have a recce troop, they just have their recce teams within the same organizational structure of the normal assaulting troops. So it's done slightly differently. But yes, the recce troops do not the recce elements do not exist within the intelligence squadrons. They are a part of the Saber squadrons, which are your assault squadrons. Viper Source asked me what breed of horses I have. Right now I have 4 horses. 2 of them are pure thoroughbreds. One is a thoroughbred mixed with their Criolla mix, which is Criolla is a Argentine Mustang. It doesn't look like an American Mustang. It's a mountain horse. Kind of probably closer resembles. It's a much bigger horse. It's kind of like almost like a draft horse, but it's a mountain Mustang from Argentina. And then I have one full quarter horse. She's short, she's fat, but she's really good at turning quick, fast, and she's honestly everybody's favorite horse. So, for someone in the military who wants to try out for a tier 1 unit, but with no exposure to tier 1 units, how can they find out which tier 1 unit they should try out based off their personality? You're honestly trying to pick a unit based off of what personality. You kind of have to look at the jobs, and that's the job that you want. Like, do you want to be the direct action guy? Like, do you want to be the guy who shoots people in the face? Like, if you want that to be your main job, then shoot for Delta. If you want to be the guy who is doing the intelligence stuff, you're running sources, you're, in alias and stuff, go to ISA. If you want to be the guy who is within those units, and you want to be the guy who calls in fast movers, you want to call in close air support, go to 24th STS. If you want to be the guy who likes to sit out in the woods and watch things through binoculars and sniper scopes, RRC may be your thing. And if you want to go down the whole naval pipeline, maybe SEAL Team 6 is your pipeline. But if you want probably the easiest way to get to a tier 1 unit, well, there's really no easy way, but remember that when you join, I know that AFSOC, like if you're typically, most people are going to go to a tier 2 unit, then go to a tier 1 unit. The Army tier 2 units are probably have a bit of a easier way to get to them, whether it's Ranger or Green Berets. I know that Air Force Special Operations has a very low, they pick up very few people. I think it's like a 1%. And the problem is if you enlist and you don't make that, it's like very similar to Buds. Then you're like needs to the arm, you needs the Air Force, or your needs the Navy. Raccoon Jones, there's no way this isn't breaking OPSEC. No, this is actually all publicly available information, right? So I look this up, right? And so what I do is I go through a search and I try to find stuff, and whatever I find is then what I talk about, right? I think the easiest way is, because I have a better understanding of what actually is going on, I can sift through the stuff that is like conjecture, like things that are people are like, because there's a lot of rumors out there about what stuff, like, for example, people think that being an ISA, you're like James Bond. Bro, I wish it was that cool. It's not, right? There are certain truths to that, right? But So instead of like confirming or denying like, certain aspects of it, I can, as we are going through that publicly available information, I can sift through it and present the publicly available information, which I know to be more than likely true. We will leave it at that. So let's see. Frank, my mom had thoroughbreds and some quarter horses and crosses. Yep. Almost everything in polo is revolves around the thoroughbred breed, but we also use quarter horses in the United States just because quarter horses are very popular in the United States. What does SVD right recon look like? Is it vastly different from other recon? Is SDV recon, is that your submariner? Is that your like SEAL type recon? You have to, if you guys are going to throw out acronyms, please, because one, acronyms are different. Like the Army has different acronyms than the Navy does. And acronyms change, right? Like, especially in my memory, I can only remember so many acronyms, millions of acronyms. So if you're ever going to write out something in an acronym, please spell it out. That way I don't have to ask you again. SEAL delivery vehicle teams. So I'll be honest, and I will always admit when I am not the most, I know a lot, but I don't know. There's certain areas where I am not as knowledgeable in. And I am not that knowledgeable in SEAL delivery vehicle teams. Um, I've never had to do an operation. I've done maritime stuff, but I've never done underwater SEAL delivery vehicles. So I don't know. I wish I had an answer, but I will admit when I don't know something, and I don't really know that much about the SEAL delivery vehicles. So, Zentrum, I've always wondered how often someone would be on a singleton mission whose other conventional units were working in the area, like back in the Afghanistan surge days. Let me read that question again. Zentron, I've always wondered how often someone would be on a singleton mission, whole mission, other conventional units were working in the area. Oh, so it depends, right? So definitely everything is situation dependent, everything is target dependent. So if you had someone who's doing singleton missions, right? There's probably a purpose. So typically the singleton missions in the outside of HUMINT, if you're running sources, are typically not going to be as long as some of the other missions, but they can be, right? But there are singleton HUMINT missions who probably going to be out there for weeks, maybe a couple months. I've seen singleton missions as long as 6 months by themselves with just them and whoever indigenous people they are working with. And then at that point, then you usually get switched out with another person to replace you, because what they don't want you, because everything in tier one is typically, even at the intelligence level, they try to, it's a sprint versus a long endurance. They want you to operate as much as effectively as you can for the shortest period of time, right? So typically, if you're in a tier one unit, you're never in a deployment over 90 days. But there are, in the intelligence side of things, there is a bit of an exception, because if you are in a type of the situation, whether you're your target or your sources, you need to be there for longer than 90 days, whether it's to build that rapport. And so those guys will typically go longer, but it all depends on the situation, on when they can have handovers. If you can have a handover, is it a reoccurring and enduring mission? And so all these things are taken into consideration. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. So Raccoon Jones, is it worth to go to the Naval Academy and try to be a SEAL MARSOC officer? Do they actually do their job, or is it just a lot of paperwork and occasionally going out on the list of guys? I will tell you, at the tier one level, The tier 1 level is very enlisted driven, right? Like almost all the operators are just enlisted. The officers are more admin and supervisors, if you will. You know, you're going to make sure you have to have adults in these units. That's kind of the way they look at it. At the tier 2 level, officers definitely are a part of operations, but even then, that's limited because most, like an SF team, there's only one commissioned officer. On a SEAL team, very similar, right? And I know specifically for the Green Berets, once an 18 Alpha or Green Beret officer takes team, he has a countdown of 2 years, and once he's done with his 2 years of being in charge of a team, he's no longer allowed to take another team. There are exceptions, like for example, if his replacement, his 18 Alpha, the other 18 Alpha is supposed to replace him, is not able to replace him, then they'll probably stay with the team longer. But you have 2 years and that's done, and you're not getting a team again. So especially if you're in the Army and you want to do something cool for a long period of time, whether it's aviation or special operations, do not go officer. As far as the Navy and the Marines do, I know that, like, for example, Jocko was an officer within the Navy SEALs, and I think that he had a really awesome career. It depends what you want to do. Do you want to be leading the SEALs, or do you want to be doing the work? Typically, if you are an officer, you will not be doing the operation side of things as long. If you were enlisted, you get to do it longer, and that's within that special operations community. It's if your idea, so that's specifically for special operations. Aviation, that's different. Navy, Air Force, Marines, obviously you can only be a commissioned officer to fly. In the Army, if you want to fly, I recommend becoming a warrant officer because they fly more than commissioned officers do in the Army. Thoughts on the psychological operation MOS, its effect in the modern battlefield space regarding influence warfare? All right, so psyops. All right, let's talk about this. The psyops guys. All right, I'm going to rope these guys into. I'm going to put 3 MOSs into this category. This is your psyops guys. This is your 35 mics, which is your regular Army humenters, and your, correct me if I'm wrong, is it a 35 Lima? Your CI guy, your counterintelligence, right? These are 3 MOSs that sound great on paper, but everybody who I know is disappointed because you don't really get to do the job that you think you're going to do, right? So CI, right? For example, at a tier 1 unit, a CI guy is support, and all he does is he handles documents. PsyOps, I've never actually seen a PsyOps guy at a tier 1 unit because we are already doing that type of intelligence anyways. And then Humint, the 35 mics, there is a pecking order in the Humint world, and they are so low down the totem pole, you will never get a source or do human operations like you think that you're going to do, like case officer, unless we're in a giant war, right? Because the pecking order for human guys is CIA trained case officers. Then you have tier 1 farm trained case officers, and then you have tier 2, your 18 Foxes, your guys who are your AFO level 1 through 3 guys. Like, and then once you get past the special operations human trained guys, only then if there's enough intelligence, enough sources, enough deployments tracking down, will a 35 mic ever get a source. So I hope that helps. Basically, if you're psyops, like, it's everybody I know who's in it is extremely disappointed, and it's not like if you're trying to get an intelligence, like the Intel ISA does way more real life psyops than the psyops MOSs or the psyops units do. Is it worth to go to the Naval Academy? I already read that one. My favorite OPSEC answer is you given in Mike Rillard's show when you said selection location is located in a location. Yeah, look, I get onto these things, and then as I'm talking, I realize, like, mid-sentence, I can't say what I'm about to say. So sometimes when I was like, oh yeah, the selection is located in it's a location, right? That's definitely one of those things. I constantly, as I'm talking, try to catch myself before I ever say anything. And luckily, I've been pretty good about it. And the best part about doing this podcast is, you have some time for them to edit, and you can go back through. We can watch it and be like, okay, maybe I said too much. Let's trim this out of here. That may or may not have happened on one of the podcasts, but it was I definitely, people have brought that up numerous times, and I find it funny, and it's not going to be the last time that I do that. Zed from 225. If you want to actually go do stuff, go enlisted. Yes, if you want to be a special operations operator, be enlisted. Trust me. Yeah, I don't know much about the SDVD stuff. To get a SEAL officer billet, you better be super squared away and physically above average to go SOAS. And also remember, if you fail buds, they're going to pick whatever branch or which section you're going to get after that. Like, you don't really get a choice. The counterintel guys always have looked so bored. They hated life and giving nearly yearly briefings. Yes. If I went to the Naval Academy, I wouldn't care about doing specialized things like sniper or breacher. As long as I get to go to operations, it's fine for me, even if I'm at the back of the stack. Yeah. If you want to be a SEAL officer, like obviously Jocko was a SEAL officer, be learning how to lead SEALs, amazing job. If that's what you want to do. If you admit a good amount of ISA is not James Bond stuff, who in the military do you believe does the most James Bond stuff? All right. So Frog Boat. So I would say no. You have to let me go back to that. What I said, right? Do they do James Bond stuff, right? Like they're like, oh, ISA is like the James Bond. Like all things, even at Delta, right? Everything's not as everything in the military, even in the government, no matter what job, whether you're ground branch, any of these cool jobs, it's not as cool as you think it is, right? And there's a lot of exaggerations, everything like that. Is being an ISA like being James Bond? That's a bit of an exaggeration. Does ISA do the closest things to James Bond type stuff? If you're talking about like being in cover and lying and trying to get sources and intelligence stuff like that, yes. There's a lot less shooting of people. We're not really assassinating people as much as James Bond does. Right. So ISA definitely does the most James Bond like stuff, but like all things, it's the truth. The truth is not exactly what the myth presents, if that makes sense. CIA political action. Yeah, the CIA does everything, anything and everything. And plus, they have less restrictions than the Department of Defense intelligence stuff does. I've never seen James Bond mow the lawn. Has ISA kind of drifted away from the JSOC units and started doing their own thing, or do they still work closely with the rest of the Tier 1 units? No, so this is a common question I get. They have always they've always done strategic level intelligence, right? They've always done they're trying to be in a place they support blue and green, but that's not their only job, right? There was a time when they pushed a lot of their efforts that let's just say a lot of manpower and logistics that they were using to support Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 was actually pushed towards the CIA. And they actually were running around the world doing operations of the CIA and stopped kind of supporting SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. And probably one of the many factors that led both SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force to create its own organic intelligence squadron. But I was actually a part of the effort to rebuild that relationship. I was probably one of the first ISA guys to go back and rebuild that relationship in the early 2010s. And we rebuilt it very successfully. So we still do support blue and green, but we also do our own strategic level operations and we have our own. We actually have our own. The unit has its own sets of its own missions. Like they also do. Yeah, they have their own missions that they do by themselves, right? That they are the lead on certain missions and certain target sets. So, anyways, I hope everybody enjoyed the live. I appreciate everybody for being here. I'm gonna do horse stuff. Like I said, it's pedicure day for the horses. Um, and because today is this week is the district cup. This Saturday, I'm playing a polo match on the mall, and hopefully I don't get thrown off. And we're gonna have an attendance of like 3,500 people, and hopefully I don't dislocate my finger in front of 3,500 people like I did 2 years ago. I don't know if anybody knows this, but I can't close this finger because I came off of horse going flat out at like 35 miles an hour, fell off, and when I hit the ground, the mallet hand was in my hand, and as I turned, it pushed my pinky out this way, and I dislocated it. I was able to put it back in, but yeah, I did that in front of 3,500 people. That was fun. So, anyways, I will talk to everybody later. Yes, the farrier, aka horse pedicure. So I appreciate all of you guys. I wish you guys have a great day. I will be doing hopefully a workout stream on Wednesday, and on Friday we're going to do our live is going to be me rating, because people keep asking this question about like rating the different special operations units. I'm going to rate them, and I'm going to give you a reason why based on their capability, how good they are. And we're also going to be including not just American special operations. We're going to be talking about Australian SAS, the British SES. We'll be covering the SBSs as well, the SSRs, and maybe we want to throw a little Israeli stuff in there as well. So that's going to happen on Friday. That's going to be the stream. So Friday, typically I'm going to stream between 1 and 2 every Monday, Friday, and Wednesday. But Friday's subject is going to be the rating of the special operations unit that I have worked with and the reasons why I'm going to rate them. We're going to do a little S tier thing, S tier A, B, C. All right. And there's going to be some controversy. I'm gonna ruffle some people's feathers. Right. So I appreciate all of you guys, and I will talk to you later.